Welcome into the I-80 Boys prediction video. We're talking about the Ole Miss Rebels today. I'll start it off with the offense. I'll talk a little bit about last year, then I'm going to kick it over to Christian here, my co-host, for the defense. So last year, really good season for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. They went 11-2, 6-2 on conference. They did win the Peach Bowl over Penn State. That was a really good game that came down to the wire against a really good Penn State defense, by the way. They did average 35.1 points per game last year. That was 16th in the country, so pretty damn good there. They averaged 462 yards per game, which was just outside the top 10. So, kudos to Ole Miss last season. The great thing about this season, they get back their quarterback, Jackson Dart. This is his senior year. He decided not to go to the NFL draft, so that was huge for this Ole Miss offense. He's probably one of the most efficient passers in the country. Last year as well, he threw for over 3,000 yards, 23 TDs, just the 5 interceptions. So that's pretty efficient. He also added another 8 rushing touchdowns as well, which I didn't know. So that's pretty impressive as well. Another thing great about Ole Miss, we talk about returning production a ton on this show. They get back all 3 of their wide receiver options in Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, and then their tight end, Caden Prekerson. This is going to be interesting here too, because they did pick up South Carolina transfer wide receiver Juice Wells. So he transferred over. He was really good for South Carolina. So that's just another option, for this Ole Miss offense and Jackson Dart. Now, I did talk about this when we talked about Ohio State. They did lose Quinshon Judkins, which I think is going to be kind of a huge hole to fill there. I like that kid. He was pretty good there in his time at Ole Miss, but they got Ulysses Bentley. He had over 500 yards last season, 4 scores. He's back, so that will help. He does have some experience. They also dipped into the transfer portal and got Henry Parrish Jr. from Miami. I watched him play there, not a bad back. So that'll help Ole Miss as well in the run department. And then the O-line keeps 3 of their 5 starters from last year. And they added, I can't think of the kid's name, one of the offensive linemen from Washington, because, Washington obviously lost about every player on their team. They got one of those guys. And then, I think the O-line, like last year, everybody talks about Jackson Dart, but they did run the ball really, really well. They're a very balanced offense for the most part, and I think it's going to stay the same this year, Christian, with Lane Kiffin. He's a bright guy, kind of one of the more offensive-minded coaches, I would say that. I expect this offense to be really, really good. I think Jackson Dart, also, I'm going to throw this out here, I think he's a dark horse to win the Heisman this year, especially if Ole Miss has the type of season which most people think they're going to have. So with that being said, Christian, I'm going to kick it over to you for the defense.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. Listen, the Land Sharks defense, they had a pretty up and down year on the defensive side of the ball, right? They hired Pete Golding away from Alabama. They finished ranked 68th in the country in total defense last year. Again, the offseason, though, for them, I think was pretty good, right? They hauled in at least 6 new, very talented starters from the portal. Here's the thing I didn't like, about this offseason for them was the spring game, or the lack thereof, okay? Ole Miss's biggest issue over the last few years has been defense, right? And they decided to do this 7-on-7 hot dog eating contest instead of actually working on tackling and physicality, right? I understand a lot of people are going to say, well, Christian, they tackled probably and had practices and scrimmages. Yeah, I understand that. But, when you've got a lot of new people, and Ole Miss likes to live in that transfer portal, right? Yeah. Bringing over a ton of talent, ton of new starters. You need to get these guys on the field and replicate actual football as much as you freaking possibly can. Because once that spring game ends, you're going to be doing 7-on-7 stuff all summer long, right? You don't really have an opportunity to do full contact until the fall camp rolls around. So, 2 weeks before the season kicks off in August? So, I didn't like that. With that being said, though, let's take a look at this defense, right? Look, up front, the Rebels are going to be led by their defensive tackle, J.J. Pegues, right? He commands double teams, right? Last year, I remember watching some of these games. He's a big dude, all right? He pretty much set the tone for him, I feel like, all year last year. They also brought in Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, who was one of the best defensive linemen coming out of high school a few years ago, all right? The Rebels also are bringing in Princely, hopefully I'm saying this right, Umanamielen from Florida, who had 7 sacks last year. He was probably one of the best, edge rushers that Florida had, I believe, last year. Okay, the linebacker room is going to be led by Kari Coleman. To me, the secondary, that's the thing. That's what started the whole Landshark defense, that Ole Miss had. Their secondary has always been pretty good. They've always had talent. It's kind of like LSU, right? Where they always have really good defensive backs. Really, I think it all gets predicated on what they do up front. But the secondary does bring back both safeties from last year in Trey Washington and John Saunders Jr. I'm excited to see the newcomers on this defense. Trey Amos from Alabama and Brandon Turnage, formerly of Alabama, committed to Georgia and then backed out and went to Tennessee. So we're not going to talk about that. But again, locking things down in that corner and nickel spot respectfully for those guys. Chris, overall, I'm always bullish on teams, defensive coordinators going into their, second year. So Pete Golding going into his second year here, I do think that defense, as much as they upgraded, I think they're going to take some steps forward. And they have to be better this year, I would say. And they weren't bad last year, right? It just was, they weren't in the big games, right? Those big games, I feel like, against Alabama, against LSU, right? They just didn't clamp down the way you wanted to. I know they held Bama pretty decent, but there were some times in that game where it was just Milroe kind of was like a magician and he got out of what he wanted to do and he was able to kind of expose them a little bit. So I got to see Ole Miss put all of it together this year. But with that being said, let's jump into their record prediction here, Chris, and I'll start us off. Hey, I got them going 11-1, right? Only loss, again, going to be to Georgia. Okay, now their schedule is actually, to me, their schedule is a lot tougher than Texas's. We just covered Texas, so go watch that video and give us your thoughts on it. But, they start the year off against Furman. Should be an easy dub. Middle Tennessee, easy dub. At Wake Forest, easier or harder than the first two, but easy dub. Georgia Southern, come on. Come on now, son. Then they start getting into SEC play. Kentucky's got a lot of talent, but I don't think they've got enough talent to stay on the field there. At South Carolina, no way. LSU, kind of in a similar boat where they're trying to do a massive defensive overhaul this year, but they also have a new quarterback in Nussmeier, so I don't think it'll be enough. Oklahoma, they get Oklahoma at home. To me, I don't think Oklahoma defensively is going to be able. I think right now Ole Miss has a better defense than Oklahoma does, just from the talent standpoint, and that is what it is. I think it'll be a fun game to watch. I think it'll be can't miss TV, but I think Ole Miss comes out with that one. At Arkansas, no way, and then you got Georgia, coming on the road to play up there at Ole Miss. So again, that's where I think Georgia will end up smashing them again. Georgia's just a very physical team. How do you beat talent? You got to be more physical than them. So go on the road at the Swamp to play Florida. Tough environment, but no way. And the Mississippi State's going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. So no way, son. Chris, give me your thoughts. I can't wait to tell me why I'm right.
You're wrong. Vegas got them going 9.5 wins. I have them going 10-2, and I almost went 9-3 here. I'm going to be completely honest and transparent. First 4 games, they better win. Let's just throw that out there. I do think the Kentucky game is going to be a close game. I don't know why. I love not Bob Stoops, but Stoops and his just physicality over there, which I think is tough for Lane Kiffin at times. I do. I think this game is going to be really close. Give me Ole Miss though. I think the road game at South Carolina will be tough as well, but Ole Miss is definitely the better team, got the more talent. But then I think they dropped the game at LSU here. I think that game last year, if anybody watched it, was a one of the best games played all season. 55-49. There was no defense being played in that game whatsoever, but it was a tremendous game. I think LSU gets revenge this year. Big game, Oklahoma. You talked about it. I'm leaning Ole Miss, and I do agree with you. I think Ole Miss has got a better defense than Oklahoma. That might piss some people off, but I truly believe that. I think it'll be a good game, but give me Ole Miss in that one. At Arkansas, tough environment, but Ole Miss definitely a more talented team there. Georgia, I don't think it happens. If you guys remember last year, that game was 14-14 in the first quarter, and then Georgia blew the doors off Ole Miss. The rest of that game ended up being a blowout, but give me Georgia in that one. Then you got to go on the road at the Swamp. I wanted to pick the Gators, but then I forgot it's Florida and Billy Napier, and it's just not going to happen. So come on, man. Ole Miss, better team there. You follow up with the Egg Bowl there at the end of the year. Mississippi State's just not any good. So give me Ole Miss. So Christian, I got a couple questions I want to ask you here about this year for Ole Miss. I have them going 10-2. You obviously said 11-1. What's the floor? What's the ceiling for Ole Miss this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think the floor would probably be 9-10 wins. Again, LSU. I would say, like you said, Kentucky, not an easy team to play, regardless whether at home or on the road. They did get some more talent right there. I think you got to go on the road and play at LSU. That's not going to be easy, right? Nussmeier could ball out. The defense could get dramatically improved. LSU did lose that game last year, so there is a revenge factor there. Oklahoma, again, right now on paper, hey, we are saying I don't think Oklahoma's defense is going to be much better, but it is Brent Venables. That is his specialty. At some point, Oklahoma has to start putting some semblance of a physical defense on the field. So is that this year for him? We don't know. The rest of, other than Georgia, the rest of the way here, I struggle to say Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi State have a realistic shot of beating them, right? And I damn sure, as much as I love Georgia Southern, right? Yeah. I damn sure I'm not going to sit here and say Georgia Southern is going to end up, rocking them. Now, on the flip side, what's the ceiling? Well, honestly, they could go undefeated. Is it highly likely? Nah, probably not. Just given Ole Miss's track record, they bring in a lot of new starters, but they could go undefeated. There is a chance they could do it. Again, like you said, the first 4 or 5 games, they should really, up until South Carolina, they should take care of business, and they're going to be favored in just about all those games, right? And then you get into the gauntlet here. Like I said, LSU, Oklahoma, that's not an easy stretch right there. They should be able to rock them and win, I would say. And then Georgia, you get Georgia at home, so again, anything can happen. If somehow, hey, Lane Kiffin knows something we don't, and that is that this team has gotten a lot more physical, and they're ready to go toe to toe with Georgia. Let's freaking go, right? But again, they could go 12-0. Chris, I'll throw that back to you. What's your thoughts?
Pretty close. I think the floor would be. I'll start with the floor. I honestly think it'd probably be like 8-4, which sounds crazy, but. You talked about Lane Kiffin's track record. He's had a lot of 7-5, 8-4 years. They usually, it seems like in the past, they had won, the first 6, 7 games and they lose the last 5. Do I think that's happening this year? No, I don't. But if something were to happen to Jackson Dart or that offense, which is the main reason why they're usually so good, they can get in shootouts with people. Maybe that doesn't happen this year. He does get hurt or something like that happens. It's hypothetically speaking, but I think probably 8-4. Ceiling though, I can't say 12-0 just because I have never seen Lane Kiffin. Last year was definitely his best year. I think they would drop at least one game here. Does that mean Ole Miss is a bad football team? Hell no. That's still definitely enough to get you into the playoff now with the new format. So, 11-1 would be probably the ceiling for me, which I think everybody and their dog at Ole Miss would agree that would be a remarkable year. I have one more question though, and I want to ask you this. You said they're going 11-1, or you have them going 11-1. I asked this question about the Texas Longhorns. I'm going to ask you the same exact question. Do you think Ole Miss can win a national title this season?
From a talent standpoint, yes. I think they could. Again, the interesting part about this year is, the interesting part about this year to me, Chris, is it's a 12-team playoff, right? All you got to do is just get into the playoff, and then anything can happen from there. We saw Ole Miss beat LSU in a very wild game last year, a shootout type game, right? So you just got to survive. They just got to get to the playoff. Let me ask you this: what are your thoughts? Do you think they can?
No, I don't, and I don't mean to crap on Lane Kiffin because I like him. I just think that they're going to have to put a physical brand of football out there on the defensive side to win a national title. When you're speaking just national titles, you got to have a physical brand of football. I have yet to see that with Ole Miss in his time there. Even if they do go 11-1, or let's say they go 10-2, the SEC is going to have some really good teams in it. There could be a scenario where, does the playoff committee allow 3 or 4 teams from the SEC to go? I think you could be on the outside looking in if you go 10-2 in the SEC. Why? Because Missouri's got an easy schedule. We know Texas and Georgia are going to be very good. LSU is another good team as well. I would like to think 10-2 is enough to get you in, But even if they do get in at 10-2, man, I just don't know if Ole Miss can win 3 or 4 games in a playoff format against really good football teams like Ohio State, Oregon, teams like that. So I don't see that happening this year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the soft spring game, as you called it, and I agreed it was very soft, the 7-on-7. Maybe they do come out and put a physical brand of football out there this season. I'm completely wrong, but I'm going to have to see it to believe it.
Chris, let me ask you a question before we get off here, too. Who was Alabama's defensive coordinator the last time they won a national title?
It's probably Golding. Was it?
That it was. Now, listen, hey, being the defensive coordinator at Alabama is kind of like taking over Ohio State after Urban Meyer. You're kind of born on third base. You got Saban there pretty much helping you out, so overseeing everything. But it still counts for something, right? He's still very much a part of that. I do think that, again, like we put all this into such a bubble, and we look at it. Alabama fans didn't like him because he wasn't the best defensive coordinator in the country. Ole Miss fans probably love him because comparatively, they can actually somewhat play defense now, right? The thing to me just kind of goes into, I think they're going to take steps forward this year, right? How much forward are they going to be, right? And not just that, but when you get in these games like an LSU, Oklahoma, Georgia, and you play these offenses, can you shut them down? And the follow-up portion of that, Chris, really comes to the offense, right? Can your offense put up more points? Obviously, no duh, that's how you win football games, but we can't have this thing where like you go in and you play Oklahoma and it's a low-scoring game and the offense struggles and only puts up like 20 points, right? But you hold Oklahoma to 28 points. Like it just can't happen.